Welcome, Badger families. Thank you for joining us today for our Finishing Strong Badger Family Forum. My name is Stephanie Benson Gonzalez, and I direct UW-Madison's Parent and Family Program. Our office is your central resource. We're here to answer your questions, send you communications, and provide you with event opportunities. And we are so excited to have you today for our Finishing Strong Badger Family Forum event with a group of campus experts who are here to help answer your questions. So finishing strong is our topic. And what that means is really focusing on how you can support your Badger as they finish out the semester and look ahead to the year. We know that at this time of year, there are a number of topics that are on students' minds, from academics to finding resources, staying well and healthy. And we want to bring together a few individuals on campus who can help address those questions. Thank you to those of you who have submitted those questions in advance. Those questions will really guide our conversation today with our campus colleagues. But if you do have additional questions after the event, or you think of other questions as we're in this dialogue today, please feel free, if you're watching on Facebook, to put it in the Facebook chat or follow up with our office, the Parent and Family Program, and we'll be able to connect you to further information and resources. I also want to thank our partners at the McBurney Disability Resource Center for providing captioning for today's event. You can find a link for captioning in the video description below for those services. So now I just want to get us started and begin by introducing our panelists, starting with Brian Bischel. Brian is an assistant director of the Cross College Advising Service, or CCAS, as sometimes it's referred to. He has over 20 years of experience helping students explore and make educational and career decisions. CCAS is a campus-wide service for students who are undecided about their major or exploring both their major and career interests. Their advisors are knowledgeable about all of the academic options available to students, and they partner with the Career Exploration Center to provide students with a holistic support as they contemplate their education and what it means to them. Next up, we have Dr. Felix R. Savino. Dr. Savino is a psychologist at Mental Health Services, which is a part of University Health Services. He has his doctorate from UW-Madison in psychology. His dissertation was on how first-year students adjust to college in 1987, and has worked on this campus since 1979 and in mental health since 1996. He also has two adult children who both graduated from UW-Madison. University Health Services is a comprehensive healthcare facility and a resource that at one time or another, most students will access and use. And then finally, I'd like to welcome Cindy Holzman. Cindy is an associate director of residence life with University Housing. Cindy is also a two-time alum of UW School of Education, and fun fact, is still best friends with her neighbors from her first year living in Slichter Hall, which is a hall here at UW's campus. Cindy has worked for University Housing for over 20 years and currently focuses on academic initiatives in the halls. University Housing consists of more than 20 buildings, housing roughly 9,000 students this year, most of whom are first-year students. So again, thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance of this session. If you're just joining us, welcome. We're about to get started. Please know that this is just one opportunity to get your questions answered. If we don't cover your question today, or you think of a question at a later time, please do feel free to reach out to the Parent and Family Program. We are your resource. So with that, let's get started. So certainly we know that academics are on students' minds as they think about the end of the semester and the end of the year. And so I just want to begin with that topic. We did get a variety of questions about academic success, and we'll kind of move through some of those topics to begin. So my first question, Brian, I'm going to start with you. And I'm wondering if you could talk about what tips you might have for students to stay connected with professors. Especially, we had one parent reach out and like, my student has a really busy schedule. What tips do you have to get them connected to faculty?
It's a really good topic, and I think one that's on a lot of students' minds, not just at the end of the semester, but all the way through. And for me, when I think about this, it depends a little bit on what year in college the student is. For a first-year student, there may be other more pressing priorities that make it a little bit more challenging to meet with professors. But a junior looking to maybe go to law school may want to start developing relationships with faculty that they may eventually ask for a letter of recommendation from, et cetera, during that time. I also want to just kind of put in a plug here that, and I know that students are busy. I know there's a lot of activity on campus, a lot of ways to get involved, research, volunteer work, et cetera. But I also think it's sometimes helpful to resist that urge to constantly be busy. Time for reflection is important. It can be really, helpful to sort of do that in a guided kind of way with, a trusted friend or an advisor or something like that. Having said that, though, I do think the best way to develop those relationships with faculty is to be prepared for and participate in class. Show up, having done the work, having read the readings, answered questions, and thought about what's likely to go on. Go to office hours. Office hours are the loneliest time of most instructors' weeks, especially early in the semester. I would also encourage the student to ask the professor what is the best way to stay connected with them, because everyone's going to have a somewhat different perspective on that. Although generally, I think in person is probably better in most cases. I can certainly convey more complex information with a student during a 5-minute conversation than I can in 2 days worth of emailing back and forth.
Such a good point. And something that you said, Brian, in that stuck out to me too, which was scheduling time for reflection. And it made me think about even just developing habits around reflection and how that is part of the process. And I think we often think about, what am I involved in? What am I doing? What are my research opportunities? But also I think thinking time is, how am I examining the work that I'm doing, and examining who I want to become or what I want to learn about is so important. And that makes me think a little bit about habit formation. And Dr. Savino, I'm wondering if I can start with you. Do you have, from your perspective, tips or strategies that you share with students around habit formation or study tips?
There's a couple of things that come to mind, and thank you everyone for joining us today. On the one sense, I always emphasize in terms of balance in life, making time for work, love, and play. Work meaning making time to be productive, love meaning making time for relationships, and play making time for self-care, taking care of yourself as a way of creating a sense of balance. I think in terms of academics, the setting matters. So finding a time of the day that you are most optional to learn material, as well as a place. If you can identify a place that is unique to, this is my study place. So if you're if it's hard for you to study in your room, finding a place on campus where it's like, this is where I go to study, whether it's a library as well. And then the other thing that I often encourage students to think about is know what kind of a learner you are. Are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner? Are you an experiential learner? And maximize that capacity to it. If you learn by doing, you want to maximize that. I think those are 3 of the general strategies that I encourage people to try out. And then we're all creatures of habits. So the habits you picked up in your first 6 weeks hopefully will continue. And a lot of these are also to avoid something called procrastination, which is a significant issue for people as they move towards their academic success.
It's interesting you mentioned procrastination too, because that comes up from time to time. I really think for all of us, right? It comes up for us when families are reaching out. And I read something the other day that kind of resonated for me, which was like, procrastination is not you being like lazy or unmotivated. It's an attempt sometimes to avoid an uncomfortable emotion. And that reframing for me, I felt like was so helpful, to be like, oh, what about this makes me feel uncomfortable or nervous or anxious? And right, I think about office hours, right? Like a student might be like, I'm procrastinating on going to office hours, but maybe they've just never done that before. And, it's a new experience, and, they're hoping to talk it through with someone first. And so that makes me think, speaking of kind of folks on our first line, Cindy, I'm wondering if I could go to you, because so often housing is having those initial conversations with students. What thoughts do you have on like habit formation or study tips? Oh, Cindy, I think you might be muted.
Hi.
You're back.
Okay, great. Thanks for asking. I think one of the primary tips for studying in the residence halls would really, to echo what Felix said about find a place that works for you. A lot of students in high school find that they can study in their room at home if they had a room to themselves, but that's not necessarily going to be true in your residence hall when you're sharing space with other people. So, find the other places outside of the residence hall room. There's a lot of dens, lounges, first floor spaces, different offices, and all the residence halls are close to various libraries. There's tons of libraries on campus, not just the larger ones the students might be most familiar with. So seek out those spots nearby. And your house fellow, which is what we call the resident assistant on this campus, the house fellow is a good person to ask, where have you found to study on campus? What tips do you have? And then the other thing that I would make sure that students and parents and families know about is that we do have a lot of in-house academic resources for students. So we have tutoring available 4 nights a week in the residence halls. We do math tutoring, chem tutoring, and writing instruction just for housing residents. So those are in places that are nearby the different areas where your residence hall students are living. So encourage students to check that out. You can find the hours, dates, times, locations right on our website. We'll have a few extra hours usually as we approach finals week. And then the other thing that I would say is, we partner very closely with Cross College Advising Service, and we have those offices that Brian and his colleagues represent. We have those offices right in the residence halls. And again, right now, students are starting to think about their spring classes. So this is a good time to stop by those offices and talk to the advisors about how this semester is going and about future semesters.
Thanks, Cindy. It just reminds me of how, we are individual offices, but there is sort of this network of support between us all and sort of this internal referral to people in terms of housing working with Cross College Advising Service or Cross College Advising Service working with the Career Exploration Center. Which brings us, I think, to another topic that we got questions about, Brian, regarding, your work with the Cross College Advising Service and the Career Exploration Center, and this idea. I really find that maybe not many, but a few parents have, really believe that if their student doesn't know what they're going to major in right when they start, that they're at a disadvantage. And I feel like what I've heard is that actually students who come in and are willing and open to do that intentional exploration sometimes have a more clear path because they've built in exploration as part of the process. So for those students who are undecided or exploring, or maybe they want to change their major right now, what advice do you have for them or what resources are available?
Thank you again for that question. This one I should be able to answer since I've been doing a version of this since 1999. And I think, the first thing I want to be really clear about is how normal it is for someone to change their mind about something. And how sort of developmentally expected it is that students, when they come to UW, are going to experience some new things, get a whole lot more data about who they are as a person, what interests them, what's important to them, what role their personality is going to play in decision-making, things like that. So again, it's perfectly normal. It's accepted. It's no disadvantage when it comes to timeline for graduation. There are some, and I have to say, in most cases, there are going to be circumstances where that might become an issue for a student, but those are few, and so I don't want to focus solely on that. But I think the first thing to do is sort of accept that it's a developmentally appropriate place to be. I would encourage students to, whether they're being advised by the Cross College Advising Service or some other office on campus, is to talk to their advisor and just let them know, I was thinking about pursuing this major. Now I'm not so sure. And ask for resources, ask for a referral. For students who I meet with, a lot of what we talk about really starts out with, just tell me what you're interested in. Tell me what your strengths are. Tell me what sort of comes up for you when you think about a major. What does it do for you? What concerns do you have? What excites you about studying a new topic? I think it's important for students also to kind of allow themselves time to change and explore. Typically, students will declare a major at UW-Madison sometime between their 3rd and 5th semesters. So there's built into most degrees this sort of period of exploration. And then also just kind of think about it as a process. So you're going to take classes in new subjects, you're going to explore career possibilities, you're going to talk with an advisor about planning and making sure that you're on track with things.
I like what you said about process too. A colleague once said to me, the process is the product. And I have like always kind of carried that with me, that it's not just kind of jumping to the end, that's really what the product is. And I know, I mean, for many students, that time of exploration is exciting and fun and, something they're looking forward to. And Dr. Savino, I think for others, it can feel like an anxious process or something that feels unknown. Could you talk about that and tips you might have for those navigating those feelings?
Sure. I mean, the more ambiguity you have in your life, the more distress it tends to be. I think one of my phrases that I've used sometimes with clients or in general is, please don't let your dreams become your nightmares. Having some level of flexibility about that. Your major is part of sort of a journey towards a lifestyle. And it's really about what kind of life do you want to have and how does that major fit in? Approximately half of our students, or at least half of the undergraduate students that I see, their degree is really something where they'll be finishing up in graduate school versus it's a terminal degree. So having that sense of it. I happen to be a 1st-generation college graduate. So sometimes knowing how your identity intersects with what you see your college degree helping you achieve in terms of your major. Also acknowledging it's the first step of a long journey. So especially for a 1st semester person, maintaining some level of flexibility is really helpful. And then the last phrase that I sometimes use, it's important to know a little bit of when to cooperate and when to compete as a student. Sometimes there's a lot of social comparison that goes on. And if you compare yourselves to others, there's always going to be someone who's smarter and doing better than you, et cetera. And so from an academic perspective, making sure, say, let me see what my values are. Who am I? Who do I want to be? And this is a long journey. Also, please seek out support as you need it in terms of academics.
Absolutely. And sorry to all about that my phone rang. So if you're on our call joining us live and you're like, is my phone ringing? It was just me. I'm having an issue with my phone. So thank you. The fun of live events, right? We get a little bit of that. We used to be, when we were doing these originally, we were home because of the pandemic and it might be like kids running in or things like that. So now it's office disruptions. Brian, I'm wondering if you could start us off in talking about final grades. I think grades are certainly on the minds of both students and families as we think about this time. And wondering too, if we can talk about both, like, I think people are just curious, like, when do students receive final grades? And also maybe if you could transition us a little bit into like this parent coaching conversation. Parents are often interested in grade information. So wondering if you could talk about what that looks like in terms of when students receive grades and what it looks like in terms of parents and families knowing about grades.
Sure. So final grades are due usually a week after the last final. And so this semester it's December 28th, which is the week after the last final exam. The time fluctuates a little bit. I think in general, most students probably kind of know how they're doing in a class going into the final, but a lot of times they don't. It's not so it can be kind of stressful. A lot of times they know how they're doing, and it's stressful because it really rides on how they perform in this final, in this final exam or this paper or whatever. When it comes to grades, what I really, I think the important thing is to kind of put it in perspective. To help students understand that grades are not the only thing that will sort of help define them. And it's the only sort of currency that students have known for so long. High school was all about get good grades to go to college. In college, it's not necessarily the most important thing about you. And so for me, it's really about, let's put it in context. Let's think about where, the factors that contribute to how things went for the student. First semester is really stressful. And there are, a lot of good reasons why a student might maybe not perform the way they'd expected to, but sometimes expectations aren't necessarily aligned either. And so I think where parents and families can come in is just sort of talk about, like, let's talk about how it felt for you. Let's talk about what you want to be different next semester. Is there additional support you might need? Are there resources? Do you feel equipped to keep going the way you have been, or is there something that you want to change? But I can promise you there are plenty of doctors out there who failed chemistry their first year in college. The other component is that, grades belong to the student, and this is part of the Family Education Right to Privacy Act. And so those things are going to be, you're going to have to encourage your student to sort of talk with you about this and how they've done. The things that are available, things like, where the student's living, are they enrolled, that kind of stuff. Those are all what we call sort of directory information. But grades, how students doing, whether they're on probation or not on probation, those things are not necessarily, those things are covered by FERPA. And so a student needs to provide permission for someone like me to talk with the parent about that.
Thanks, Brian. That's helpful. And I think families often wonder, like, what's the best way to get this information? And sometimes the easy answer is your student, just talk with your student, connect with your student and have those conversations. I think about grades, but also other topics early. And it's okay if you haven't had that conversation already, but sometimes we find that having that proactive conversation instead of perhaps the reactive conversation that can be helpful. So it might be talking about, we do have soon, the start of a new year, the start of a new academic year, going into spring semester, maybe checking with your student. What do you think went well? What do you think didn't go so well? Why do you think that might be? Here's some expectations I have about how we communicate. That could be related to grades. That could also just be general check-ins I've heard from families. I remember at orientation a few years back having a parent tell me she had a first-year student at another college starting and hadn't heard from them and was like, what's going on? We haven't talked. And the student was like, what do you mean we haven't talked? We're texting all the time. They just had a different definition, right? Of like what that meant to talk or communicate or check in. And so, having those conversations in advance, setting expectations, talking about grades, those are all good things to do. There are one-time grade release forms through the Office of the Registrar, but your student also has to initiate that. And so if that's the case, you might just find that your student just wants to, communicate with you directly about their progress instead of initiating that formal process. But certainly if folks have more questions about that, please reach out to our office, the Parent and Family Program too. So I sort of touched on a topic that I'm going to read. We've been summarizing questions, but I'm going to read from this question a little bit and go to a few of you on it. So it's actually related to communicating with your student. And what if that's a little bit difficult? So I'm going to read this one more directly. This person wrote in and said, I try to ask my freshman son how he is doing with his classes and how things are going, but I don't get a lot of information from him. How can I get my student to open up and share? Cindy, do you mind if I start with you on this one, and I'll go to others too?
I am curious to hear what my colleagues have to say because I know they've both survived living with teenagers and I'm new to it. My daughter just turned 13, so I'm learning how to handle this at home as well. I meet with a lot of students individually, students who are living in the residence halls for various reasons. And I will say, I find one of the least helpful questions is to say, how are classes going? That's pretty much guaranteed to get a, very short response. And so I try to open up the conversation in other ways with more open-ended questions. Tell me about a project you have on your classes that you're really excited about, or tell me about something that you read for class this week, or, just kind of asking them to focus on what are you enjoying about your classes? What is getting you excited in any of your classes? Or even talking about what's happening outside of class. Sometimes the first semester of classes is maybe things that they know they have to get through. Maybe it's not the classes that are really exciting them, but they are really excited about a volunteer opportunity that they're doing, or they're excited about a student organization. And sometimes those aren't just social opportunities, but those are really great ways that students are exploring what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, where their skills and talents lie, and then they can help think, and then you can help them think about and send them back to, you know, the advisors that Brian talked about to really think about, now how does that relate back to future classes, careers, majors. So I think the more you can focus on open-ended questions and really trying to get them to talk about like what's getting them excited.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I do have parents who call us and like, they say exactly that. Like I asked them how it's going and they said, fine. Like, what does fine mean? Or how do I get to learn more about fine? So I like that idea of asking questions that are more expansive or are more than a yes or no answer. Cindy, I know you said you're just getting into it, but I feel like that's very wise advice. Brian or Dr. Savino, do either of you want to add anything?
For me, I think I don't have a lot of wisdom, but in general, I would say hang out with your children's friends, because sometimes I found out more from their friends than I did from them. I actually think being non-judgmental and maybe asking why you want to know and being specific really does help. You want to be sort of an ally and want to share in their experiences. There's certain vicariousness in wanting to know the information. I also think there may be some gender differences. I think usually most people who identify as male tend to give very short answers to what's going on and want to be respected for that. So being non-judgmental, asking open-ended questions, sharing why you want to know, and hopefully it's the first time you're asking isn't when they come home for Thanksgiving. It's been an ongoing part of the relationship you have with them, part of the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Brian, anything you'd add to that?
I think just that, so when I'm meeting with a student in my office and I ask how things are going, which is, not necessarily the best way to start a conversation, I find myself having to follow up with like, tell me about fine. What does fine mean? Fine could be, I'm barely getting by, or I'm getting straight A's, so I don't know how to interpret that. I do think that, Cindy, your question about like tips, I had the easiest teenager in the world. I don't really know that I have anything to offer. What worked with my daughter was to not really have rigid expectations about what success looked like. It really was more about tell me who you're trying to become, and that worked with her. I don't know, it's going to work with everybody. I also find that the male students do tend to be a little bit shorter in their answers, and it takes more just sort of non-judgmental probing. Just like, tell me more about that. What's going well? What are you concerned about? And a lot of times with the men on campus, it's a little bit more about like, what are you afraid of here? What are you trying not to say here? And a lot of times it's that sort of external judgment. Things aren't going as well, and everybody's going to know and think that I'm deficient somehow.
I really appreciate that. I think about that a lot too. And sometimes in my work with parents and families too, like to follow the fear, what is the fear that's underneath this question? And I think that's true too. Like if you do get a response to you that feels a little bit more defensive or a little bit more hostile, what might be the fear that's underneath that? And I think too, Brian, you might have brought up at the start of this too, like all of this is normal. And, going through different slips or surges with academics, wondering where your academic home might be, trying to find balance in your life in terms of academics and relationship and social life and well-being. All of these are truly skills that I think we continue to kind of analyze and develop throughout our lives. And I heard the advice once not to say to new students that like, these are going to be the best 4 years of your life, because one, that's kind of sad, I think. Like, it's like, is that it? Right? Like just this time. And two, that just puts a tremendous amount of pressure on really just a particular time period when really we have our whole lives to kind of ask ourselves some of these questions and grow and develop and build these skills. So it really is a normal part of life, is kind of assessing and going through different things and sometimes struggling or failing and then coming out of it too. So I appreciate your note about the normalcy in that. Dr. Savino, I want to go back to you because you alluded to something that we got questions about, which you might imagine is coming home for break. And I think for some families, they've done this before, but there's just new circumstances. I think for some of our families, it was so different because their students started during COVID. And so it just was a different experience in terms of even like what coming home was. They might have been home doing remote learning. And so for a lot of families, coming home for break is a new experience. And even if they've done it before, we know each time it looks like a different experience. So we have Thanksgiving coming up, followed by winter break in a couple of weeks. We know certainly students have been living in many cases away from their families for a few months. Dr. Savino, would you like to share any tips or things for families to keep in mind when their students come home?
These are all going to be very generalities, so you want to be careful about whether they apply to your particular child. I think in general, life experiences changes us. So in some ways, one of the phrases I've used in my time here is, for most college students, their first and last semester may be the most stressful because of different changes. You're assuming new roles, different experiences impact your identities, who you are. Sometimes there's usually two primary things that students really are important. One is their academics and the other is their social connections. How are they growing in both areas? And when they come home, they may have either a sense of accomplishment of like, wow, this is living up to my expectations, or they may feel a sense of lingering disappointment. I think this sort of, I don't know that I totally buy into the drive for independence. I think it's interdependence. I think your children always want to have some level of interdependence with you for both good and bad. But I do think checking in with what was your experience like? And also there may be some challenging of traditional values. What they believed in July may not be what they believe in November and January, and just being able to listen and have a deeper dialogue about that. Also, in terms of transition, I often tell my clients, it's going to take a few hours or a few days to get back to what was normal, because especially if you've been gone for a couple of months, you have to make a mental and emotional switch to reconnecting with family, with friends, etc. I've also found, at least with first-year students, in general, and there's, again, a generality, but in general, the more that those first that experience is living up to your expectations, the greater the sense of reconnection, etc. The more it has not lived up to your expectations, it's important to be able to be authentic and to be able to develop a sense of trust and saying, here's kind of what happened, here's what's not, and being able to share that. And it takes a while to get into that. It takes a day or two. And over a holiday season too, regardless of the holiday, be careful of the timing of the conversations. Those are some general things I'd like to mention.
That's a great tip. I appreciate what you said too about the connection too with holidays and timing of the conversation. I think that resonates with some people too. I was just listening to something about that the other day, and it was like, it doesn't mean the conversation isn't important, but it might mean like, is this the exact moment to have it at the Thanksgiving table with grandma? They're next to me, just kind of hoping we can all just reconnect and share what we've been up to. So that's a wise point. Cindy, could I come to you with that one too? I imagine, in university housing that you're helping students think about coming home for breaks. Any thoughts you have to share on that one?
I think Dr. Savino really hit on a lot of what we talk with students about. Certainly the House Fellows are connecting with students right now and encouraging them to think about what their plans are for the upcoming break periods, if they will be traveling home, and thinking about how that might be different. And, the House Fellows, again, those are older students, so they can share what that experience was like for them and what it was like to reconnect, not just with family, but sometimes reconnecting with maybe the high school friends or friends back home is a real concern that students have, because they might feel like, they've changed and their friendships have changed, and maybe they didn't stay in touch as much as they thought they were going to.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. And as we're about to transition to our next topic, I just want to note that we are about halfway through our time together. We're going until 1 p.m. today. So if you are just joining us, welcome. We're having a conversation on finishing strong, looking ahead to the next academic semester and finishing strong this academic year. We also want to note that this session is recorded at the same link that you're viewing it at right now. So if you're joining us on YouTube or you're joining us on Facebook, either way, you can return to that link and you can rewatch this. Or if you know of someone who missed our conversation today, you can direct them back and they can watch it at any time. The link is recorded and live right when our session finishes. I also want to, if you're just here, I want to remind folks that we do have captioning provided for the session. So you can find a link in the description below this video on YouTube or in the comments section on Facebook. And if we don't address your question today or you think of additional questions, please always feel free to contact the Parent and Family Program. We are your resource. You can email us, you can call us, or you can find our contact form on our website. And we're happy to answer your question. Or if we don't know the answer, connect with any of these experts on our panel today or others to get you the information that you need. Great. So I think we've alluded to the topic that we're going to transition into, but I want to kind of focus on it more concretely, which is this idea of health and well-being, which certainly touches all of the other topics we've talked about, from parent and family transitions and coaching to academics. But we did get questions about this topic, so we want to spend a few questions diving in a little bit more deeply. Parents and families are, as you can imagine, wondering about the role they can play supporting their student outside of the classroom too. And again, I'm going to read this particular question. So one person submitted this: when I notice my student is troubled and depressed, what can I do to help them open up and talk about what's bothering them? And then I'll add a parent question. Another one asked, how can I check in on my students' well-being without being intrusive? So with those questions in mind, Dr. Savino, I'll start with you. What tips might you have for those folks?
Wonderful questions. Let me start with, it depends on your relationship with your child. I think being able to, some of the things we've mentioned already about asking open-ended questions, being a good listener, trying to create that sense of connection. One of the things we use is sort of observe. What is it? What's making you feel depressed? Asking just general questions. What kind of things are going on? I like the idea of asking about from a holistic perspective, everything that's going on in a person's life. How are you doing financially? How are things? How's your physical health? How's your emotional well-being, etc.? I think the question about how do you not make that being intrusive, putting it within the context of kind of what's working for you and what's maybe not going so well, and what can I, as a person who cares about you, who would like to be involved in some level of your ability to cope, how can I be an ally or an asset in that, and being respectful of that. So I think having the conversation, starting it in a way that's sort of saying, how is everything going? Not just because sometimes there's a tendency to focus primarily on either the academics or the social life and not all the other aspects of a person, including things like how are things going with your roommate, the financial part actually for many students can also be a significant part of that. And then being aware that there are lots of resources at this university that you can say, listen, you might want to check out talking to someone. There's no closed door here. Different student services here will refer you to the right place if you're looking for some help as well. Yeah, I hope that's helpful enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, I think I'm going to go to you next, and then Cindy. Just curious your thoughts on the same question or the same topic in terms of how families can start a conversation on either mental health or well-being with their student.
I think, really briefly, I think it's important that people understand that perfection is not the goal here. That it's okay to struggle. It's okay for things not to go well. I remember talking to my own child about how, in 1984, when I started college as a first generation college student, I had no idea about how to do anything. I was just every day, just kind of step by step, doing what I think I had to do for the next thing. So I didn't plan for anything. I didn't even know that I needed an appointment to go meet with a career advisor. Like, I just showed up one day. So I think it's important just to sort of let people find their way, offer some guidance, and they don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be a straight A student for this to be a successful time of their lives.
Thanks, Brian. Cindy, I'll go to you too. What thoughts might you have for families on starting the conversation?
I don't know that I have additional advice on top of what Dr. Savino and Brian offered about how to start the conversation. But I will add, if your student is unsure about where else to go, again, they have probably gotten to know their house fellow. We have my full-time colleagues that work in each of these residence halls where students are. So it's okay if you can't remember the names of all the different offices and how to get in touch with people and where to go. That's a really key role that we can play for first-year students in the residence halls, is helping them get connected to all the different kind of resources and help them think about where they would like to go. Do they want to talk to an academic advisor? Do they want to get connected to mental health services? Are they needing to really see a medical doctor at UHS? Or do they just need information about how to get connected to the rec well services on campus and get connected to working out and different things like that? And then, in terms of practicing well-being, we offer a lot of different programs in the residence halls. Every week there's activities happening that are not just social in nature, but that are really focused on self-care. That's actually been something that we've focused on in the different programs and services that we're offering. So there's a lot of things where students can drop by and do a short yoga session or a short meditation session or some kind of other well-being activity.
Thanks, Cindy, for that reminder too, because there is so much robust programming happening in different places. Like you said, whether that's university housing or whether that's through recreation and well-being, there's sort of these pockets throughout campus that have these different activities and ways for students, I think, not only to take care of themselves, but also to find community too in that process and meet other students. So thanks for highlighting that as well. Dr. Savino, related to that, we got a couple of questions about access to mental health services. Could you talk more about what that looks like for students?
Sure. If a student would like to make an appointment for any level of mental health service, you go to our website, uhs.wisc.edu. Thank you. And that also has our 24-hour crisis line. But on the website itself, you can create what's called an access appointment. It's basically a 20 to 30-minute screening with one of our access providers. And once you go through that access appointment, then there's a determination about what type of mental health services is the best fit for your needs. That can be individual therapy, that can be a single session, that can be community referral if the person wants long-term in-depth therapy, that can be referral to a group as well. There's one particular service that I want to actually highlight because I think many students really like it. It's something called Let's Talk. Every day throughout campus, it's a drop-in. You get to talk to a therapist. It's roughly a 30-minute conversation. It can be confidential because sometimes for certain students, confidentiality is really important. They don't want formal, but they would say, is this something that I should get help for? Is this normal, or is this something that is unique to me? What is depression? What is anxiety, etc.? So I think Let's Talk is another way of accessing services where you don't need an appointment as well. We also have very comprehensive crisis support services if a person is in danger to themselves or others, including an on-call system where you can call, and we want to make sure that people are safe and get the support that they need. So that's in general how you access it. I think the question sometimes is, how quickly can I receive the type of service that I need? And I think it's good to have a conversation. Always start with us. Certainly, there are people who will need services in December, and we want to make sure we have some capacity to respond in a way that's helpful for the students. There are definitely some limitations. And all of our services right now are what's called hybrid. So, for example, we will often start with a telehealth appointment for an intake. Let's meet with you through telehealth, and then we'll offer in-person services if people want to meet face-to-face. Some students, surprisingly, do prefer telehealth. Look, Felix, I can meet with you in my pajamas at 8:30 on a Friday morning. If I had to walk over, I wouldn't. So about 50% of my individual clients come in person, which is more what I prefer based on my age and other identities. But also about half of them say, listen, I would rather do telehealth, and we're going to do that. We have some limitations, such as we don't provide services for people who are out of state, but we do have a number of staff who are called care managers and help people connect one another.
That sounds great. Thank you for that. And I really appreciate the plug for Let's Talk too, because sometimes a student too, they're going through something where, I hear from a parent, they're like, my student doesn't necessarily want formal counseling right now, but they just had a breakup, or they have a test next week that they're just like all of a sudden feeling test anxiety for the first time perhaps, and they're looking just to process that with someone. Let's Talk is such a good resource for that. And I know another thing too is sometimes the myth that might exist that, if you are looking for that intake appointment, that it could take months to get into. And I've actually learned that the wait time for UHS is much different than that. And then in fact, if students are encouraged by UHS providers to even call back daily as appointments are opening up daily.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. We actually do maintain a cancellation list, so that if a person has an access appointment, but it's not for 2 or 3 weeks, but we routinely get cancellations. So we will call a student. The part of that process is we'll call. If you don't answer, we go to the next person. So, but there are some people that are seen much more quickly as well. So, and it's important that we monitor that.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. The other thing I want to mention, because I did not, and we have so many services, but we do something called behavioral health. If your child comes to us through our medical services, sore throats, sprained ankles, etc., we do screen for things like depression, anxiety, substance use, eating. And if there's a mental health issue that is identified, we have a behavioral health provider who gets a referral from a medical provider and says, listen, this person came in, has a sore throat, has been really tired, etc., but they screen positive for symptoms of depression. Can you have a conversation with them? And that's another way of linking the body and the mind and saying, so I think that's a very wonderful service. Those individuals are coming in for a medical issue, and then we're screening. And if they screen positive, we can provide some support for them.
It's great. It's helpful to kind of know about the interdependence of the departments and what the inner workings look like, and that those services are connected to one another too. Thank you. Well, and I know we've spent some time, we're at about the last 15 minutes, and I think the majority of what we've talked about a little bit has been on, things students might be facing right now, but we did get a section of questions that were sort of looking ahead to next semester or even next year. And related to that, we got questions about housing and just housing access right now and what that looks like. I can share a few thoughts on that too, but Cindy, could I start with you? Could you talk a little bit more about student housing for next year?
Yes, this is a very timely question. University Housing has already started communicating with current students, finding out about their interest in living with us again next year. So students were asked to let us know if they had interest in living in the residence halls again next year. And that process closed last week. And then as luck would have it, today, students are finding out if they are being assigned a time to select a room for next year, or if they are on the wait list for right now. So we do have limited capacity for returning students in order to maintain space for next year's incoming first year class, since we are primarily a first year program. But students will be finding out if they're on the wait list or if they can select a room for next year. That room selection process then will kick off next week. And then we'll have some updates for folks that are on the wait list. We'll have some updates before we head into fall break about how we're doing on the wait list. Are we at capacity, or can we offer space to a few more students? So if you do find out that your student is on the wait list, I would encourage you to start looking at off-campus housing opportunities if you haven't already done so.
Thanks, Cindy. And related to that, I wanted to know too, there is an office on campus called Campus Area Housing. The role of Campus Area Housing is really being a liaison for students, and they maintain a listing service that does overview, for those who choose to advertise with them, does overview options in the Madison area. I do want to note though, in a few questions that we received reflected this, off-campus housing has been harder to find than typical. And so I might not have an easy answer for you, but if you are looking to talk about that, or are looking to know more about campus area housing or more about other things we might recommend, I just want to invite families to contact our office, the Parent and Family Program, directly. You certainly also could connect with UW-Madison's off-campus housing resource too. But I just wanted to note, I don't have a simple answer for that one, other than there is increased interest. And that might prove that students are looking a little bit farther off campus, or looking to sublet with another student, or might be finding roommates in a different way. And so I just want to note that those questions came in, and that I don't have a super easy answer to that, other than we'd be glad to talk further and kind of talk with you about your students' personal questions too. So please do feel free to reach out to our office. Another few questions that we got related to looking ahead in addition to housing were, I believe we got 2 or 3 questions from families of students who are seniors and are looking to graduate soon. And Brian, you hinted at this a little bit, I think, when you talked about the first question about finding connections with faculty. Maybe you want to go to law school, so those letters of rec are going to be important. But could you talk more about resources for students looking at career prep or at job search? One parent wrote that their student was stressing a little bit about what that looks like and what guidances look like for life after UW. What thoughts might you have on that one?
Yeah. So first I need to, disclose that as an academic advisor who works with students primarily in their first 2 years, there are people on this campus who are much more gifted at helping students at the end of their college career than I am. In terms of resources, the first thing I would say is that every school and college has a career services office. If a student is stressing, if they don't know what to do, they're having a hard time locating themselves in the process or making decisions about things, to go and talk to someone and recognize that career advising, career counseling is kind of like going to the gym. If you go once a semester to the natatorium, you're not any stronger each semester. So this takes some concentration of time and energy. I think in terms of the resources, start with career advising in your school college. They may refer the student to the Career Exploration Center if the student needs to have more of those "who am I, what am I good at, where is this going" kinds of conversations. In terms of specific tools, loaded into every student's MyUW is a thing called Handshake. That's a tool that students can learn about different career-related events on campus, internships, jobs. They have career exploration tools that can be really helpful. If they want to connect with alumni, there's a website, Badger Bridge, that can be helpful to just sort of help kind of break down and make it easier to start that networking process. And then the last thing is there are a couple of classes, especially in the College of Letters and Science, and probably actually throughout the curriculum, that can help with that. And both of them are, one is called, it's Letters and Science 210 and Letters and Science 215. And one is just about the initial, 210 is a 1-credit class about the initial, just sort of like thinking about careers. And 215 is a 3-credit class. It's really more about communicating about careers and how one really dives more deeply into the process of beginning life after college.
Thanks, Brian. It's interesting, and I think helpful to know too that they're in exploring that question. There's sort of like traditional ways, maybe, in like going to a career advisor, going to a career center, and then there's also these academic experiences that students can have too that unpack that for them. I think that's a helpful thing to know for families. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to give space for each of our panelists to provide some closing or final thoughts. This could be something that we didn't cover in our parent questions that you want to make sure folks know that's related to this topic. It could be a piece of advice you'd like them to pass along to their students, or it might be a plug for something happening in your area that you want folks to know about too. So I'll start, Felix, I'll start with you. I'll start with Dr. Savino, and then we'll go to Cindy, and then we'll go to Brian, and then we'll have a few other final thoughts. So Dr. Savino, anything you'd like to add?
Just a couple of things. One, I've learned as a parent, and very recently a grandparent, every time I adjust to one of my children's stages, they change stages. So expect the unexpected and adapt. And then one advice that I give a lot of our clients, because I do think from a wellness or a holistic health perspective, eat well, sleep well, get exercise, and spend more time with people that make you feel good about yourself. And if you can, avoid people that make you feel bad about yourself. So that's something that I think can be very helpful in the moment.
Thank you. Cindy?
on that topic of sleep well, eat well, etc., when students come back from the Thanksgiving break, we will certainly have a lot of activities in the residence halls to try and help them, focus on studying for a while with some fun study jams, study sessions, tutoring, all that kind of stuff. But then we'll also have relaxation events that are designed to help students take some time to relax and de-stress and just forget about classes for a little bit and social activities. So we're going to try and help them spend some good time on their class prep and also spend time relaxing, taking care of themselves, getting enough sleep, eating well. So encourage your students to get involved in those things that we're offering. And the main thing when I meet with students that I try to encourage them to remember is, this was one semester, and it's okay if everything didn't happen this semester. You've got time left in college, you've got time left in life, so it doesn't have to be that this semester was the end all be all of everything.
Thanks, Cindy. That's a great point. Brian.
I think the point I would want to leave with, and this is something I talk about with students all the time, is it's really important to live in the moment. And I know that sounds like a really sort of trite thing to say, but decisions that you make about classes right now are not necessarily going to be lasting for you. So live in the moment, find joy in what you're doing right now, and try not to be so future directed about things. If you take a literature class next semester instead of a sociology class next semester, you're still going to be okay. But sometimes students are really fixated on those. Every decision I make is fraught and will be forever.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like that advice, right? Like when you're not sure what to do, it's just like take the next right step. That's all you have to figure out. And then the next right step, and it kind of falls into place. And I appreciate too what you said about joy and finding joy in those moments too. I think that's so critical, both for our well-being, but also just for our relationship with others. And, families, I want you all to know too, that we are in this with you, all of us on this panel, and really all of us at the university. We're here to walk with you. And we know that you are advocates and allies for our students. And that's why we have our office too, the Parent and Family Program. We want you to know that when things happen or you're just not sure where to go, that you can start with our office, and that we have connections to the folks on this panel and to their offices and to others to make sure that we can get the resources that your student needs so that you can share that with them and get them connected. Because we certainly know that often, whether it's because they're coming home for Thanksgiving or winter break, or it's because, they're texting you, often you're the first folks who know about something, whether that's a concern they have or a question or a curiosity, something that they want to get connected to. And, we really need each other. We all need each other. And we want you to know this is a big place, but there are people here whose whole jobs are to support families and to support students. And we want you to feel welcome and invited and encouraged to reach out to us and help form and build that relationship to us, because we have the same goal. All of our goal is student success, whatever that looks like. I think as Brian might have pointed out, whatever that definition is that's really our goal is student success and well-being. So thank you to our panelists for joining us today. Thank you, families who have joined us live. If you are watching this at a later time, thank you. Related to that, again, you can go back and watch this anytime. This link is available either at YouTube or Facebook for later viewing at any time. So please feel free to share this with others too. And again, families, if you've got an additional question or something that we didn't address today, the Parent and Family Program is your resource. Email us, call us, visit our website, and you can talk to myself, Stephanie, my colleague, Monica, my colleague, Jenny, or one of our 2 student interns. We are here to help. So with that, thanks for joining us. Have a fantastic day, and let's stay connected. Take care.